All right, so Vince is still acting pretty sus.
He is sus. He's the imposter.
I love that.
It was in the middle of class that I realized my gut suddenly felt like quicksand, and I was melting into myself until I'd eventually implode and cease to exist. Something was off about Vince. I knew it. The story about his grandma's birthday just didn't feel right. Now I needed to know about the money thing as well. My books were right. I'd been lying to myself when I kept assuming it was just a numbers error I'd made. If Vince's books were supposedly right, and he was the only other person with a key to the Tom Petty cash box, then I raised my hand. Mr. Scary, I need to use the restroom. My teacher scribbled a hall pass, and I was out the door and speed walking toward my office before I even blinked once. I gathered up Vince's books as quickly as I could and started going through the most recent transaction. I guess Vince must have thought that I would never take an interest in keeping track of our money because it didn't take long to notice why everything was off. Vince had been padding the numbers. According to his books, we'd paid the bullies slightly more than we actually did. In fact, most of all the recent payments were slightly higher in his books than they'd actually been. Also, some of the money received transactions were listed as slightly lower than what we'd taken in. I was too stunned to breathe. I'm surprised I didn't pass out right there in the office. There had to be some sort of misunderstanding. Vince had always been the money guy. How could this happen? There was only one answer. I just didn't want to admit it. Vince had been padding the numbers so he could steal money undetected. But that...
Wait. Well, that doesn't mean he's necessarily against that. I wonder if he just made a bet and then he, couldn't pay it back.
Maybe. Got in too deep. But that didn't make any sense either. Why would Vince do that? This was his business too. And if he needed extra cash or something, he would come to me and we'd find a way to get it. I couldn't understand why he would possibly be sneaking money like this. I wondered if it had something to do with how weird he'd been acting lately. One thing was for sure. I was going to find out before the day was over. I slammed his book shut, surprised at how mad I really actually was. I put them away and then dug out the top. I put them away and then dug our Tom Petty cash box out of the garbage can. I hid it inside the empty toilet tank in the second stall. I wasn't just going to sit back and let Vince keep stealing cash until I found out what was going on. The first thing Vince said when I walked into the office that morning at recess was, "Mac, our Tom Petty cash is missing." And my first thought was, why exactly did he look for it in the first place? Answer, he was going to take more money. "It's not missing," I said. "What?" Vince asked. I held out my hand. Vince just looked at it. Joe and Fred walked in, saw us, and instantly stopped talking. I didn't flinch. "Your Tom Petty key, please," I said, glancing from Vince's face to my open hand. "Are you serious?" he asked. "Unless you want to tell me why you've been padding the numbers so you can pad your own wallet." Vince looked at Fred and Joe and then back at me with a helpless look on his face. I probably should have made sure we were alone to confront him like this. It would have been the professional thing to do, but right at that moment, I didn't really care. Vince dug the key out of his pocket and handed it to me without saying anything. No explanation. I suddenly felt like I had just eaten at a seafood buffet that had been sitting out in this hot sun for 8 hours. I would wait until later to grill Vince about why he would do such a thing and why he'd possibly lie to me about his grandma's birthday party being that evening and what the real reason was he was bailing on us. We had bigger things to take care of just then, like finalizing our plan to take out Justin after school. "Shall we get down to business then?" I asked. "Unless, of course, anybody has any lame jokes they'd like to tell." I glared at Vince. He looked away as if he'd just found something really fascinating on the wall that needed his full attention. Vince didn't talk much the rest of the meeting. Every time I looked at him, he looked away or put his head down or rubbed his face. Good. I hoped he felt slimy like a chunk of boiled cabbage, and I was glad he wasn't going to be at the shed after school. I didn't really want him there anymore anyway. Not if I couldn't trust him. Just thinking that made me want to puke all over my desk. I had a hard time thinking about anything but Vince later that day when I met up with Joe, Nubby, Kitten, and Great White outside the shed. It was 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting with Justin. I tried to put Vince out of my mind. Our plan was dangerous and needed my full attention. The playground and football field had been deserted since 3:25. Nobody would see what was about to go down. Kids usually cleared out pretty quickly after school, and who could blame them? I certainly wasn't going to complain. My plan didn't exactly call for an audience. I unlocked the shed with the key I'd snagged from the janitor earlier that day and ushered the bullies inside. Blimey, it's bloody hot in here, Great White whined as they squeezed inside. I know. It'll just be 20 minutes, okay, I said. Oh, bucks to this, he said irritably. Kitten and Nubby also looked uncomfortable, but they didn't say anything. In fact, I saw Kitten eyeing the tools on the wall like a little kid might eye the shelves at a Toys R Us. I just shrugged and said, remember, the signal is Blue Jay. Just get on with it already, Great White said. Okay, see you soon, I said with a grin and shut the door. I walked back to the top of the hill overlooking the football field and waited. After about 15 minutes, I saw Justin walking toward the shed from the far end of the field. There was somebody with him, but I couldn't tell who it was. It looked like I was outnumbered, but Justin didn't know that I had a crew inside the shed waiting for my signal. That's why I was surprised to feel so nervous. I was nervous. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this kind of anxiety. It must have been way back when I was 7 or 8 and about to ride my first roller coaster. Suddenly, I really wished that Vince was with me right then, despite everything that had happened that morning, but there wasn't really much I could do about that anymore. So I took a deep breath and trotted down the slope. I slowed at the bottom and walked across the football field to meet up with one of the school's meanest kids. We converged on the shed at the same time. I nodded. He nodded back. We were about 10 feet away from each other, right near the shed's entrance. Justin wore really baggy jean shorts and the waist sagging down to his thighs so his boxers showed. I always think it's lame when kids wear their pants so low. It makes them look really dorky, like they just took a dump and forgot to take off their pants first. I also noticed that Justin had shaved his head recently. I wondered if it was some sort of homage to Staples. The kid with Justin was his best friend, Mitch. The two are always together, and they are usually up to no good, like cheating, skipping school, smoking, or beating up younger kids, either for money or just because they feel like it. They're basically a walking, talking duo of terror. Mitch also wore baggy jean shorts and a black t-shirt. His head wasn't shaved, though. Instead, he was sporting his usual greasy brown hair and white, straight-brimmed New York Yankees baseball hat worn slightly off to the side. He had his hands behind his back. I didn't like that, but in just a few moments, it wouldn't matter. Thanks for coming, I said. Whatever, man. Just say what you gotta say, Justin said. At that moment, I saw Mitch take 3 quick steps toward the shed. His hands came out from around his back to reveal a bike lock, the kind that is like a big U shape with a little bar that locks on the end. I knew immediately what he was going to do with it. Blue Jay! I shouted as loud as I could, but it was too late. Mitch slid the bike lock onto the shed's door handles and snapped on the lock bar. The doors clanked as the bullies and Joe tried to jump out, but the lock was in place and the doors clattered harmlessly against themselves. The bullies yelling from inside. Mitch and Justin laughed at their pleas. Trying to pull a fast one on me? Justin scoffed. My stomach sank. I had been double-crossed. They knew. They had known everything about our plan. The worst part was that the shed was like a sauna inside, and now the bullies and Joe would be trapped in there for who knows how long. The natural thing to do at that point would probably have been to run, but I couldn't leave behind my hired muscle to cook like that. It wouldn't be right. Besides, there were only 2 of them. Maybe I could still get us out of this. But that's when the clunky ham and fish head gravy really hit the fan, as Vince's grandma says. A car squealed A car squealed to a stop behind me. I turned around and saw a black Honda with a spoiler so huge the car could probably have taken flight if it was going fast enough. The 4 high school kids from last Tuesday clambered out of the car and walked toward me, with PJ in the lead. Well, 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 if it isn't Mr. Problem Solver Guy, PJ said. How nice to see you again. I just looked at him right in the eye and said nothing, trying to stay calm. Ooh, looks like we got a tough guy on our hands, boys, PJ said with a sickening grin. The 4 high school kids, Justin and Mitch, grouped around me in a circle. Their shadows blocked out the little sunlight the little sunlight there was that day. You won't be so tough after we've finished with you, PJ said. I knew that my only chance of survival was to strike first, to surprise them. I wasn't much of a fighter. In fact, I'd never gotten into a real fight before, but I figured I was smarter than all of these guys combined, and that gave me at least one advantage. I spun around as they enveloped me. I quickly determined PJ to be the closest, and one of the high school kids was with greasy black hair to be the biggest. Hey, let's talk about this, guys. I've got money. I'll pay you. I can double what you're making now. PJ scoffed. I doubt it, Justin said. Right here in my pocket, I have a roll of money, and I have even more in my office. I reached into the pocket of my jeans. They leaned forward eagerly. All that was in my pocket was the note I had sent to Justin. I grabbed it and pulled it out, but as my hand cleared my pocket, I let the paper flutter to the grass. I made a motion like I wanted to pick it back up. PJ predictably bent over to get it first. That's when I struck at him with my foot. I didn't really have a clear plan because, like I said, I'm not a fighter, but in this case, it was them or me. I quickly kicked back the same foot, so my heel slammed into the shin of the big, greasy high schooler behind me. I heard him hit the ground with a grunt. Then I turned and kicked another kid in the knee. He hit the ground like dead weight. The high school kid to my right reached out for me. I spun to face him and took a step back to avoid his reach. Two big hands grabbed my arms from behind. I had stepped right into them. I swung my body from side to side, trying to free myself, but my hands were too strong. The hands were too strong, and the fingers just dug into my arms even harder. By now, another kid was coming at me from the front. He had a huge smile on his face, and he crackled his knuckles. I was a sitting duck, and he knew it. "Let's see what you got, loser," I said. "Okay," he said, and reared back his fist. That's when I leaned back into the kid holding me and kicked my leg up as hard as I could. My foot connected with the one spot sure to cause the most damage. I'll never wish that sort of pain upon anyone, but this was life or death. "Oh," he moaned as he crossed his legs and dropped to the ground. The kid holding my arms actually snickered. I guess it's normally pretty funny when people get hit in the groin. Now it was his turn, though. I stamped my heel into his shin as hard as I could. He yelled and his grip loosened. I pulled away from him and then turned and gave him my best shot. He dropped to the ground and started crying. I almost felt bad. PJ was still down, holding his face. Two other kids were in the fetal position holding their business, and another one was trying to get to his feet again. I looked at Justin, the only one still standing. He looked scared. I walked toward him, and then I stopped when I heard a loud banging on the shed. PJ had gotten up and was standing next to the door. He held a small black tube in his hand like a can of hairspray. He stuck it against the crevice of the shed's door. "Stop fighting, Mac, or I'll douse your little friends," he said. There could have been anything inside that black tube. It could have just been water. I looked around at the other kids as the other kids were climbing back to their feet. It wasn't a risk I was willing to take with my employees trapped inside. "Okay," I said, holding my hands up. All of my confidence just drained out of me like ice cream from a little hole in the bottom of a waffle cone on a hot day. The other high school kids were on their feet now. Two of them grabbed me, one on each side. They squeezed hard, and I felt a pain shoot through my arms. I was surrounded by kids, but I'd never felt so alone in my life. "You're in trouble now, you little punk," one of them said. I wanted to say duh, but I thought it best to stay quiet right then. Mitch, PJ, and Justin closed in on me. PJ used his Hollister shirt to wipe his face. His nose was red. I hoped I'd broken it. "You're going to pay for this," he said, looking down at his shirt. I nodded while raising my eyebrows and said, "Yup." "Are you smarting off to me?" PJ yelled. I nodded. That's when sharp pain erupted in my stomach. I hadn't even seen it coming. I always thought that people overreact in movies when they get hit in the gut. I mean, how bad could it hurt, right? Well, I can say it hurts way worse than it looks. The air shot out of me and a sharp pain stabbed my stomach, followed by a deep rumble that ran straight to my brain. I gasped for air, trying not to cry. It hurt worse than I had ever would have imagined it could. I tried to bend over, but the two high school kids held me up. I wheezed for air, sure I was going to suffocate. PJ laughed. Not such a cocky punk now. The other kids laughed. One holding my arm whispered into my ear, "It's payback time." I continued to struggle to breathe. Just when I thought it was all over, that I was going to pass out, I finally was able to get some air. But that's when the side of my face exploded. Okay, it probably didn't explode, but that's what it felt like. It basically felt like Barry Bonds took batting practice on my head with a titanium baseball bat. My vision was blurred and my eyes watered. I tasted blood in my mouth. "I think I'll spare you the rest. It wasn't too pretty. They worked me over for what seemed like a couple hours. It couldn't have been that long. When they stopped, it was still pretty light out. I was proud that I never cried, but toward the middle, I just started to go numb. I think maybe they broke my tear ducts or something. Because it hurt so bad, I definitely should have been crying. I kept wondering the whole time why no cars were stopping to help me. Maybe they just didn't notice the little kid getting the snot beat out of him by a gang of high schoolers. Maybe they were too afraid to stop, or just didn't care. Or maybe they were all on Staples' payroll too. In any event, Staples' hitman eventually dropped me onto the ground. I looked up to see PJ looming over me with a big smile. That's for Barnaby, and there's a lot more where that came from. Slow and painful, just like Staples says. Right, Mac? They all walked away laughing. After a while, I clamped my feet. My stomach ached and my side hurt, and my face felt like a lumpy piece of deep-fried cheese. I spit some blood onto the grass and gently touched my cheek. I winced. My whole face throbbed. We're almost to the end of the chapter. I'm just going. I was relieved to find that at least I had all my teeth. The shed burst open about that time. Mitch must have taken the bike lock with him when he left. Kitten emerged soaked in sweat. He stumbled forward a few feet and then sat down. He breathed hard. His sweater and collared shirt were soggy, and his normally neat hair stuck all over. Nubby, Great White, and Joe followed. Their clothes were drenched, and they panted as if they'd just run a marathon. We had just gotten wasted. Mitch and Justin had known everything. It had been a classic double ambush. Mac, I can hardly breathe, Joe said. I nodded and pointed to a spigot behind the shed. The four of them took turns drinking from it. After a few more minutes of walking around and breathing hard and taking off their drenched shirts and wringing them out all the sweat, they looked a little better. Wow, Mac, they did that to you? Joe asked after examining my face. I'm okay. They were just sending me a little message. Don't worry about it, I said. He shook his head and whistled. They're not getting away with this, Kitten said softly. His eyes were beady and dark. His mouth was drawn into a tight frown. I'd seen that look before. Kitten was angry. The insane little kid looked like he wanted to grab a shovel from the shed and beat somebody's face with it. And he would have too, had the enemy still been there. Aye, those wankas will pay. I'll kick their asses. Arses.
Okay.
Great White added. We will, guys. We'll get back at them, I said. For now, though, you should all just go home. If you want to stay on board and help me get back at these jerks, meet me in my office tomorrow at morning recess. They nodded. With that, we all parted ways to get home. The walk felt much longer than 9 or 10 blocks. I couldn't think about anything but who had double-crossed us. One person kept creeping into my mind as the obvious suspect, but I kept erasing it immediately because there was no way. Skimming some cash was one thing, but double-crossing your best friend into that kind of beating? No. There was no way he'd do that. Whoever the snitch was, though, we needed to figure it out. And fast.
Keep reading.